Rain hammered the courthouse windows like fists on a locked door. Clara Whitman sat at a long mahogany table, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. The attorney read bequests in a slow, polished rhythm that scraped her nerves. To my granddaughter Clara, I leave $1. Laughter fluttered around the room, thin and cutting. A silver coin slid across the table, cool against her palm, initials etched on its edge. The metal felt heavier than reason, as if it carried a secret weight. Eyes watched her, hungry for embarrassment. She tucked the coin away and stared at the rain's gray blur, jaw set. She did not know the coin was a key, or that it would upend her life. Within days, it would pull her toward a hidden valley. It would test her courage, and it would lead her children home. Welcome to today's story, a journey filled with emotions, unexpected turns, and lessons worth keeping. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and make you think, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let us begin. 3 days later, Clara worked the morning shift at Willow Street Diner. The air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. The coin sat in her apron pocket, cool and insistent. Humiliation lingered like stale smoke. She poured refills, balanced plates, and smiled until her cheeks ached. Her phone vibrated near the register during the rush. Graham said, "Your inheritance is incomplete." His voice was steady and precise. She stared at the coin and felt irritation rise. He asked to meet the next day after the hearing. She wanted to refuse, but curiosity pressed on her ribs. After lunch, she counted tips with stiff fingers. The next morning, the courthouse echoed with shoes on polished floors. Paper and lemon polish scented the air. Trevor waited near courtroom 3 with his attorney and a stack of binders. He wore a navy suit and an easy, measured smile. Clara sat with a public defender who knew her file and believed her heart. Reports highlighted Trevor's income, insurance, and the family home. Other reports highlighted her variable hours, night classes, and one-bedroom apartment. The evaluator emphasized stability and consistent routines. The judge listened and nodded with patient eyes. When the ruling came, it landed like cold iron. Primary custody to Trevor, alternate weekends, and one dinner each week for Clara. She stood, thanked the court, and steadied her breath. Outside, the air felt sharp and wet. Rain tapped her shoulders and crept into her shoes. A black sedan pulled to the curb and idled. Graham stepped out with an umbrella and a careful expression. He opened the rear door and waited. Clara slid in and watched rain ribbon across the glass. City streets gave way to 2-lane roads and tall evergreens. Fog clung to the hillsides like a low blanket. She rolled the coin between her fingers and felt its ridges bite. Graham drove in focused silence, hands light on the wheel. They turned onto a gravel lane lined with stone markers. At the end stood a wrought iron gate with graceful curves. The arch above spelled Hawthorne Haven in weathered script. Graham parked and lowered his window. A small panel waited beside the gate like a mouth. He pressed the coin into a round slot and held it. The gate swung inward without a sound. The entry road curved down into a green valley. Microhomes nestled among maples and spruce. Solar panels angled toward a pale sky. People looked up from garden beds and footpaths. Their faces were curious, not suspicious. The smell of damp earth and cedar drifted through the window. Curiosity, hook. But what she discovered beyond the gate would challenge every assumption she still trusted. Graham parked near a long porch with wide steps. A woman with a silver braid met them at the top. Her palms were calloused, her eyes clear and kind. She introduced herself as Miriam Clay, a retired medic. She welcomed Clara to the valley as if to a table. Graham explained the trust in clean sentences. Clara's grandfather had built this place over many years. The coin was a literal key and a symbol. The trust named Clara trustee and provided a stipend. She would have a home here and responsibilities that mattered. The number felt unreal and practical at once. 15,000 each month to lead and learn. Clara stepped off the porch and walked the central green. Her shoes pressed water into the grass. A bell clanged once from the community center. She entered a bright hall that smelled of bread and pine soap. Tables were set with simple plates and mismatched cups. Jonah, the engineer, stood near a wall map of the watershed. He described the micro-hydro system and the solar array. His words moved like tools in reliable hands. Clara stood in the doorway and let warmth settle behind her ribs. She imagined Ellie reading in a window seat under lamplight. She pictured Sam helping carry crates and asking technical questions. She pictured herself sleeping on a real bed, not a folding couch. Yet dread pressed in with equal force. Could she lead people she had just met? Could she protect a valley she did not yet understand? Could she fight Trevor's certainty and Victor's money? She watched the coin glint in her palm and made a quiet plan. She would listen before deciding. She would learn the systems and the stories. She would earn trust, then carry it carefully. She would visit the children this weekend and tell the truth plainly. Afternoon fell, soft and gray. Miriam gave Clara a cabin near the eastern ridge. The cabin smelled of cedar planks and fresh sheets. A window framed the valley like a painting. Clara placed the coin on the desk and traced the initials. On the porch, the air tasted like rain and sap. A thrush called from somewhere in the firs. Her lungs expanded with the valley's quiet. Clara made tea and watched steam drift up and vanish. She wrote a list on a yellow pad in careful lines. Legal questions, operations, education options for the children, security and water management. Why me? Morning arrived with birdsong and pale gold light. The council met after breakfast in the main hall. Miriam ran through tasks with crisp efficiency. Jonah updated the group on turbine maintenance and forecasts. Zuri offered to map wildlife corridors along the ridge. Clara listened, asked sober questions, and took notes. When the meeting ended, she walked the spillway path with Jonah. The river ran clear and fast, rattling over rock. The concrete face of the dam felt cool under her palm. She considered the coin again and the life it had opened. Life at Hawthorne Haven formed a steady rhythm that soothed Clara's nerves. Morning council at 8, operations at 10, learning hours in the afternoon. The bakery's warm air smelled of yeast and cinnamon. She slept through the night for the first time in months. On the first Saturday, Ellie and Sam arrived with backpacks and cautious eyes. Ellie found the treehouse library and sank into a beanbag chair. Pages whispered under her small hands. Sam studied the dam from the overlook and traced the flow maps with a finger. Jonah walked them through the turbine room. The floor vibrated faintly with the turning shaft. The water's roar sounded contained, like muscle under skin. Sam asked questions until his voice ran dry. Clara watched him stand taller with each answer. At lunch, residents shared soup and fresh bread in the hall. The kids ate quietly, listening to stories of gardens and repairs. They laughed at a joke about goats that escaped a pen last spring. For the first time in weeks, Clara tasted food without a knot in her chest. That night the sky cleared, and the valley glowed under a thin moon. The air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke. She tucked the children into the cabin's bunks and sat on the porch. The coin rested on her knee, catching pale light. Her phone vibrated on the table beside the tea mug. Victor said, "I will offer $5 million for the land." Clara pictured his immaculate office and his hunger for leverage. She ended the call and felt her jaw tighten. She told Graham the next morning and watched concern narrow his eyes. By noon, a drone launched from the ridge. Zuri piloted while Jonah monitored the feed on a tablet. 2 men in company uniforms appeared on the screen. They wore hard hats and carried case tools. They moved along the spillway like surveyors. Their presence crawled under Clara's skin. Jonah flagged the footage and filed a report for the records. The storm arrived 2 days later from the west. Wind bent the tops of the spruce until they creaked. Rain slapped the river and smeared the paths into slick ribbons. Clara stood in the control room with Jonah and watched levels climb. Warning lights blinked an angry red. The automated spillway did not open. Jonah checked the system again and again, jaw clenched. They could not wait. They drove the utility cart through sheets of rain. Water hit Clara's face like thrown gravel. They abandoned the cart where the slope grew steep. Boots sank into mud and made sucking sounds. They reached the west floodgate. The wheel was stiff from disuse, but not broken. Together, they leaned into the valve. The wheel groaned and turned. A jet of brown water tore through the secondary channel. Reservoir levels steadied, but the west embankment trembled. An alarm shrieked in the control room radio. Evacuation began at once. Residents moved uphill in a line, headlamps bobbing like fireflies. Clara tied a rope around her waist and waded toward a low home. Cold water climbed to her ribs. A family waited on the porch, eyes wide. She crossed twice with supplies and once with a child on her back. Her muscles quivered, but she did not falter. Back on high ground, breath steamed from her mouth. She tasted rain and metal. Dawn scraped the clouds thin and revealed the damage. A dozen homes soaked through, gardens scoured, tools scattered in silt. In the hall, soaked coats dripped onto concrete. The stove ticked as it cooled. Zuri brought her camera and a tight voice. The drone had captured trucks on the boundary road just before the failure. Company logos were clear under night vision. The footage felt like proof and like a threat. Graham organized statements and evidence logs. He spoke to regulators and documented every step. Volunteers arrived from a nearby town with tarps and shovels. A mother ladled soup while her toddler slept on a folded jacket. Clara moved among the tables and thanked each helper. Sam stood with Jonah at a whiteboard sketching erosion controls. Ellie sorted donated blankets and lined them in neat stacks. Clara felt pride rise like heat, followed by fear's steady hand. Curiosity. Hook. But the coin in her pocket would soon unlock more than doors. It would expose a plan buried for decades. Work crews stabilized the slope with straw wattles and rock. Crews cleared debris from the spillway and checked anchors. By late afternoon, temporary power returned to every home. The valley exhaled a little. That evening, the council met. The hall smelled of wet wool and strong coffee. Graham summarized legal steps and timelines. Zuri outlined media interest but promised careful release. Jonah reviewed system vulnerabilities and upgrades. Clara listened, then asked for training in dam operations. She asked for extra radios and a rotating night watch. She asked for community classes on flood readiness. No one argued. She returned to the cabin after midnight. The coin lay on the desk beside a half-written note to the children. Her fingers traced the initials again and again. Her eyes caught a faint pattern along the edge. It looked like tiny marks carved beside the letters. She raised the coin to the lamp and squinted. Lines sharpened and turned into the idea of numbers. She pressed the coin to her lips and tasted copper. She set it down and decided to sleep. She would look again with clear eyes at first light. Outside, the river roared with a raw, living sound. Mud smelled sour where the water had stood. Frogs called from the flooded ditch in wavering notes. Clara wrote tomorrow's task list in neat lines and underlined priorities. She scheduled a youth crew to help sort supplies and label bins. She circled training for radios and safety drills. Only then did her breath slow, steady, and deep. 2 nights later, the cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. Sam sat at the desk with a magnifying glass and the coin. A brass lamp pooled warm light on the wood. Sam said, "There are small numbers on the coin." Clara took the coin and held her breath. Alongside the initials, minuscule notches formed a sequence of letters and digits. Jonah confirmed the pattern and opened the topographical map on a laptop. The coordinates pointed beneath the community center, 20 feet down. Historical files showed the hall sat on the old farmhouse foundation. A root cellar and a secure room had been reinforced during wartime. They found the access under a storage shelf. A section of flooring lifted to reveal stairs that smelled of dust and cedar. The air felt cool on Clara's face. A steel door waited at the bottom with a round indentation. She pressed the coin into the recess. A lock released with a clean, satisfying click. A titanium tube stood on a pedestal inside the chamber. The lid turned with a dull scrape and came free. Inside lay 3 sealed packets and a letter in neat cursive. The first packet held a deed dated from the early 1930s. It granted mineral and subsurface rights across the property. Jonah spoke softly about precedents and superseding claims. The second packet contained a small drive and a ledger of phrases. Elias described investing royalties from green patents in early cryptocurrency. The balance, as last recorded, equaled $42 million. Clara gripped the table edge and felt the wood dig into her palm. The third packet documented decades of environmental violations. Soil reports, water tests, aerial images, and signed affidavits lay in order. Graham reviewed the materials with a careful lawyer's eye. He said the evidence formed a spine for injunctions and criminal referrals. Clara felt equal parts relief and grief. Her grandfather had carried this burden for years. He had trusted her to finish the work. The county board convened the following week. Clara presented the deed and the chain of custody. Several members asked rehearsed questions about filings and renewals. The vote came 4-3 against recognizing the mineral rights. Clara steadied herself by gripping the back of a wooden chair. The next morning, a private security checkpoint appeared at the county line. Contractors allowed residents to leave, but slowed supplies to a crawl. Delivery trucks idled for hours while guards inspected cargo. The blockade felt like a hand at the valley's throat. Routines tightened. Food and fuel were rationed with clear rules. Work crews rotated to conserve energy and lift spirits. Neighbors checked on elders twice daily. The hall smelled of coffee and damp wool again. Maps papered the walls like quilts. Clara briefed the community each evening and answered hard questions. Children carried light loads and learned radio protocols. The days blurred into a rhythm of effort and resolve. Quiet moments still came. Clara watched stars burn cold over the ridge. She ground beans by hand in the morning and listened to the burr. She felt gratitude and fear occupying the same breath. Curiosity, hook. The turning point would arrive through the one voice she least expected to support her. Regulators began to move. Investigators reviewed the footage and the reports. Zuri documented the repairs and the sabotage without sensational tone. Her photographs showed hands, tools, mud, and faces set with purpose. Volunteers from neighboring towns returned with lumber, seed, and blankets. Jonah trained residents on the upgraded control systems. Ellie learned to log levels and clear alarms. Sam mapped erosion channels with a small drone he built last year. Clara met with Graham in the cabin's small office. He outlined the path ahead in steady steps. Emergency motions would head to state court. Federal agencies needed sworn statements and chain of custody. Media interest would help, but the timing must be careful. Clara asked for a plan if the blockade hardened. Graham suggested mutual aid agreements and rotating town pickups. Clara drafted letters to nearby churches and civic groups. She asked for specific items, not vague support. Requests included sump pumps, boots, tarps, and first aid supplies. Responses began within days, handwritten and sincere. At night, she spoke to the children by satellite phone. Sam described a drone modification for search and rescue. Ellie talked about helping sort meals and reading to younger kids. Clara felt pride soften the tightness in her throat. Victor called once with a new offer and careful words. Clara declined and hung up before anger led her anywhere unwise. More volunteers arrived after a local station aired Zuri's piece. A school robotics team offered to help monitor slope changes. An old earth mover rumbled down the main road like a dinosaur. The driver had worked mines and now worked restoration. He taught Sam how to read soil slumps without instruments. Clara walked the embankment at dusk and listened to frogs. The air smelled of wet clay and cut grass. She thought about courage as quiet choices that repeated daily. She thought about leadership as attention paid without vanity. She thought about the coin as weight and invitation. News finally broke beyond the county line. An environmental magazine published Zuri's photo essay and a sober report. Calls and emails multiplied. The community formed a media team to protect privacy and limit disruption. Donations funded repairs and new safety systems. Clara felt relief but refused complacency. The blockade remained, petty and grinding. She reminded the council to plan 2 weeks ahead. She reminded herself to sleep and to eat warm food. She kept the coin in a small bowl by the door. It caught morning light like a quiet nod. The custody hearing arrived on a bright, cool morning. Sunlight spilled across the cabin floor in clean rectangles. The coffee smelled rich and a little smoky. Clara adjusted her navy jacket and smoothed her hair. Ellie tied a blue ribbon and checked it twice. Sam fidgeted with a pen and breathed slow. The drive to the courthouse traced the river and the gold leaves. Graham reviewed notes with a calm, deliberate tone. Clara watched the water flash between stones and steadied her chest. Inside, the same judge presided with an unreadable face. Graham presented a clear story in careful steps. He described stable housing, health coverage, and consistent routines. He outlined the community's education support and the children's progress. Reports showed attendance, grades, sleep, and mood improvements. Letters from residents described responsibility, kindness, and growth. Photos showed the children working, learning, and laughing. Clara kept her gaze forward and her breathing even. She let the facts do the talking. Then Trevor stood in his blazer and spoke plainly. Trevor said, "The children thrive with her. I support primary residence." The courtroom exhaled as if one body. The judge noted the cooperation with measured approval. After a short recess, the order was read. Primary residence with Clara during the school year. Regular weekends, 1 weeknight dinner, and summer weeks with Trevor. The judge encouraged continued civility and clear communication. Clara squeezed Ellie's hand and felt Sam's shoulder touch hers. Outside, crisp air tasted faintly of rain. Leaves rattled along the steps like small bones. Graham smiled without theatrics and handed her certified copies. Relief moved through her like warmth after cold water. She thanked him and promised careful stewardship. At Hawthorne Haven, recovery turned into renewal. The dam's systems were rebuilt and secured. Engineers added redundancies and better monitoring. The western embankment held strong with rock and terraced roots. Gardens returned in neat rows, green against dark soil. New paths made evacuation routes clear and quick. A volunteer crew rebuilt damaged homes with straw bale and timber. Laughter rolled across the green during work breaks. Tools clinked, saws hummed, and hammers rang. The hall smelled of stew, garlic, and fresh bread. Zuri's investigative feature ran in a national magazine. Agencies filed charges against company executives. An injunction halted local operations pending review. Residents met with environmental lawyers about long-term restoration. Clara read every page and asked focused questions. She learned to read water like a map and wind like a message. She kept a notebook of lessons and mistakes. Midway through the month, the community held a gathering. Curiosity. Hook. What the children chose to do next convinced Clara the legacy was already alive. On the stage, Ellie announced a kids' garden guild. Members promised to plant pollinator beds and track butterflies. Sam unveiled a drone protocol that mapped erosion and reported anomalies. Teens volunteered to manage shifts and teach others. Cheers rose and fell like waves. Clara felt tears gather and did not hide them. The Haven Trust launched before winter set in. Initial grants targeted watershed repair and apprenticeship programs. One project prepared a site in Appalachia at a retired plant. The plan converted bare ground into homes and gardens. Veterans and single parents would form the first cohort. Clara visited with Jonah and took notes on power design. The team shared templates for councils and safety plans. Back home, evenings glowed with lantern light along the paths. Children practiced a small play about water and care. Elders told stories that kept roots deep. Work carried hope in practical steps. Clara walked the green at dusk and greeted neighbors by name. People waved from porches and clapped dust from gloves. The air smelled of sawdust, sage, and damp earth. Victor appeared once at the main road and did not enter. Lawyers handled every contact after that day. Clara moved her attention to what she could build. She met with the school about transportation schedules. She coordinated with nearby hospitals on emergency pathways. She secured bulk purchases of radios, pumps, and seed. She kept promises and wrote down new ones carefully. In late afternoon sun, the coin was mounted in a wooden frame. A local carpenter had shaped the frame with patient hands. Grain lines shone like ripples around the round recess. Clara lifted the coin and felt its familiar weight. Initials flashed, then settled into the wood. The crowd stood quiet for a long breath. She spoke from the steps in a steady voice. She thanked the community for trust and stubborn kindness. She thanked her grandfather for building with foresight. She thanked the countless hands that had carried each day. Applause rose and echoed against the hillside. Music started, simple and warm. Children danced, and adults swayed with tired smiles. Steam lifted from soup pots in white curls. Clara stepped back and watched Ellie teach a friend how to plant seeds in trays. Sam checked a tablet and handed a radio to a new volunteer. Purpose moved like current through the green. Later, stars sharpened above the ridge. The air held a clean chill that promised frost. Clara stood on the porch and let quiet fill her. She thought of $1 and the doors it had opened. She thought of failure and grace, grief and grit. She placed her palm against the doorframe and felt smooth wood. She chose to believe that care multiplied when shared. She chose to believe that courage accumulated in small acts. She chose to believe that home was the people you build with. She whispered a thank you to the dark and meant it. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please share it and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is the $1 legacy, and I hope it travels far.